You think note. A life's kind of pretty, but this is what it is sort of song. It's an attitude song, and it wasn't by chance that it was her exit song. She says she drove down the coast and straight into her new life with 23 bucks in her pocket and one pair of jeans. A car falling apart so bad she could feel every bit of the 101 from SF to Studio City rolling on down below her through a hole in the floorboard next to the gas pedal and the brakes. She says the first thing she did when she got down there was accidentally get herself into a stalker scenario with this guy named Larry she met at the racetracks. And the next thing she did after that was get herself a gun and keep it under her bed. She says the next thing she did was buy herself one of those old-fashioned newspapers with the classified section, and then she took that puppy down to the beach by the Santa Monica Pier and then over to Venice so she could circle ads for jobs while she laid out in the sand. This one's rhyming, which is weird, but it kind of, I guess goes with the theme. He died in Sacramento, and he died in Indio. He died in California, but what happened, I don't know. They say he died in Redlands, way out in Riverside. He went down to that desert, and in that desert, he fucking died. They say he died near Lodi, and they say it wasn't his fault. They say he died in Fontana, and they say he died near Galt. They say he shot his brains out, someplace way out near Galt. They say he died in Fontana, and it wasn't really his fault. Okay, maybe I'll just do this one and then I'm done. Thanks, you guys. I feel like my chunk is a little depressing considering the theme is childhood, but you know, it's just a slice of life. He's someplace out in the desert. His school's someplace out in the desert. He's bitten the dust and he's thinking the desk. And so then the desk becomes. The stars all become. Nights become. Stars bloom. A field's his skull. 2 horses move, and the horizon's his skull. Jackrabbit's his skull. Indian paintbrush that's haunches plus red and sage. His skull's a field. He's falling off the hay bale forever. He's doing the slow lope forever. Does he wear spurs in heaven? His spurs all dissolved when he ascended. He's behind the bunkhouse. He's hooking bales. He's along the fence post. He's scaring quails. Okay, thanks, guys.
I remember Southern California, speckled sun through an oak canopy, watching the spots of light dance around faster than I could follow. I like to explore my own physical boundaries then, in the way that a driver at the helm of a new car tries to understand the car's size before getting into difficult parking situations. Sometimes I'd rapidly blink my eyes while walking around my elementary school. The world became a series of snapshots, and I, a movie director. I would move my head to change the angle of the camera, creating artfully composed shots of my classmates, teacher, the squat stucco classrooms, a mural painted by a class of 5th graders who graduated years before, depicting great moments of human triumph over nature. The Model T, the space shuttle, the cotton gin may have even been in there. Years earlier, I remember exploring scale. Laying in bed on a Sunday morning, I would concentrate on my presence, not just the size of my body, but how I fit within the world outside. If I focused hard enough, I could make myself feel so small, just a little unknown speck of dust on a massive planet. Then concentrating for another minute, I could make myself feel huge, like the center of the universe. Most people think of sun when they think of Southern California, but when I think of sun, I think of the Olympic Village in Barcelona. So far to walk, totally alone, without any water, not a cloud in the sky, a few scraggly plants hanging on for dear life, in unencumbered arid heat, in dry, sandy soil. I ate lunch in a forgotten roadside park, and my peach dripped all over the ground. The Southern California I remember is dappled sunlight. There's a particular spot in a park in Pacific Palisades, California, that I still see in my sleep. It was by the tennis courts, which were clustered around a small parking lot accessible by a long service road. Big, tall trees, maybe pines, kept the lot cool and shady all day. Just beyond the park, you could glimpse a row of typical Southern California 2-story houses, circa early 80s. A good size, not ostentatious, subdued, a little bland, but elegant and pretty. The trees that surrounded the park were planted on grass embankments, and that's where I liked to hang out. I would sit in the grass at the foot of one of those enormous trees, surrounded by fallen pine needles and acorns. It felt secure, my back up against a tree, being able to survey my domain with the knowledge that no adult would attempt to climb one of these small hills. Sometimes I'd get my hands on a tennis ball or a piece of bazooka gum they sold for 10 cents at the little trailer that acted as the pro shop. Either one would hold my fascination for a while. I preferred the gum since it came wrapped in bewildering comic strips. Our house in Pacific Palisades was nestled into what must have been a pretty formidable rock hill back in the Chumash days. It was paved, some of the rock chiseled away, but still untamed, with lush plant life growing from any conceivable nook. I've read that in South Florida, it feels like nature is constantly on the verge of taking back civilization. That if the gardeners didn't come out every day and chop back the elephant ears and giant palms, that houses and streets would quickly cease to exist. My neighborhood felt similar. Plant life was everywhere, mature specimens of prehistoric species. Yet even still, there was a sense that man and nature had reached a rare compromise. Part of this hill was brutally leveled. My house plopped right on top of it. But our backyard transitioned erratically from paved suburban backyard into barely contained wilderness. We had a little cement patio with an outdoor dining table and a short brick wall that gave my little sister a black eye one day when she was a toddler. Then right beyond that was a steep rock slope. You could see how individual layers of rock had formed on top of one another. It was like one of those beautiful topographic models that architects make out of styrofoam. 2 owls would come by each night and nest on it. My dad gave them names, something like Jojo and Mr. Hooter. I never reckoned with the grand rock wall. I doubt even now I'd be able to climb it. But if you stood on the patio with your back to our California bungalow, and you looked to the right of the rock wall, you would see the rustic area that captured my imagination for years before we finally moved away. First, there was a cinder block wall, maybe 3 feet high. This wall held up a grass platform, formerly a koi pond, but filled in after a lengthy and combative ordeal with some raccoons. This was all before my time. I only knew it as the grass platform. which in itself was rather unexciting, except that it acted as base camp for what lay above. The steep rock wall transitioned into a perfect little hill, maybe 1,000 square feet at most, but dense with trees, dirt, fallen leaves, rocks, and bugs. I would hike up and absorb myself in each shift in terrain, methodically traversing every inch of the hill, learning its contours. I annexed it to the sovereign territory of my bedroom, making it mine, burying things there, hiding toys in bushes and behind tree trunks. I doubt that my parents ever ventured up there. It was a child's landscape, unforgiving to anyone over 4'6". In the front of our house, there was a dense patch of ivy on a small hillside that separated our front yard from the street below. I recall spending time in the ivy only once. I was 5, and I had my first existential thought while standing in the ivy gazing at the sky. The thought was, I am 5. What does that even mean? Beyond the raccoons and the owls, we had deer who would silently float through our backyard on damp mornings, the marine layer hanging heavily and visibly in the shade. My mom would call to me when she saw them, and I would run through our small house, slowing down very carefully before I reached the plate glass sliding doors so as not to scare off the timid deer. We'd stand there and watch them in a competition of stillness. Something, not us, would spook them, and they'd trample off through the ivy, up over my private hill, into another neighbor's yard. There was also a wide variety of insect life in our backyard. I loved to flip over our stepping stones to uncover the teeming communities that lurked beneath. In an early display of capitalist ingenuity, I went to my neighbor's house with some salt, offering my services as an exterminator. I diligently combed over their lifeless, empty backyard, flipping over stepping stones and pouring salt on anything that moved, especially worms and snails. I also experimented with culinary applications for insects. I enjoyed eating ants in those days. I would kill them with my index finger, then eat their little carcasses. They were spicy. I've always had a taste for spicy foods. We had a lot of roly-polies in our yard. In some places they're called pill bugs. We called them roly-polies though, and since I spent a lot of time exploring the intricacies of my private hill, I became quite familiar with them. One day I persuaded my sister to eat a roly-poly. I'll never forget her reaction. She started sobbing because it tasted so bad. The poor insect's shell was splayed out in pieces all over her tongue and around her mouth, hanging on from strings of drool. There were also snakes. My first elementary school was perched precariously over a wild canyon, where the little asphalt that still remained was rapidly splitting apart into kid-sized tectonic plates. Mostly it was chaparral. It was coastal scrub. Whatever image chaparral conjures up in your head is probably a decently accurate representation of the canyon next to Marquez Elementary School. As an adult, I ventured into the canyon a few times. I made out down there when I was 19 on a spectacular first date. And a year later, I returned to shoot a short film in the canyon, a thing with a mystic who did Santeria in the coastal scrub. But those trips were reckless. I knew that the canyon was infested with rattlesnakes. They would slither up from the canyon, up a treacherous rocky slope covered in fennel plants that we would chew during recess. They'd emerge onto the playground, unwelcome guests interrupting our games of handball and foursquare. The school's janitor would walk over with a broom and calmly sweep them back into the canyon. I wouldn't have been surprised if one of the snakes, years after being so savagely humiliated on its own turf, recognized my scent and led a surprise blitzkrieg on me and my date. Perhaps they did, and I unknowingly managed to escape, both me and the snake too confused by the tall grass and blinding sun for the attack to take place. It doesn't rain in California anymore, but I remember when it did. There were cliffs in our neighborhood that would collapse into landslide when the rain didn't stop. But sometimes when the weather was fine, I would go there with my friend Alex and fly kites. His family called these cliffs the Bluffs. Our kite flying spot was in the middle of a long exposed section of the bluffs. It was always empty, with grass growing sparsely in patches. Every now and then there was a solitary bench, spaced so far from its nearest neighbor that you felt pity for the benches, these stoic figures forever staring out at the horizon, watching the earth turn and complete another cycle every day, as the sun fell and reflected metallic light across the glassy surface of the Pacific. After we made out in the canyon amongst the rattlesnakes, I brought the same date to the bluffs. We hiked across the face of the cliff, down a trail that had emerged over the years to provide a haven for binge-drinking teenagers and nature-loving stoners. We followed it into an exposed metal culvert, which we treated like a balance beam, walking in a single file line, one foot directly in front of the other. A few minutes later, we were in the trailer park, oddly situated on one of the most elite beachfronts in California. I'm not sure anyone actually lived there. We didn't see anyone, though the trailers were all in pristine condition. Sure, they were a bit weathered by salt and sun, but someone clearly put a lot of tenderness and care into their maintenance. All paths led to a cottage that seemed to be some kind of clubhouse. The windows were wide open, as were the doors. I have often noticed that